Oh, blimey, I've been going for 1 minute already. Didn't even know it had started. Yeah, thank you, OBS. You're just awesome. Okay, all right. Okay, all right. So we're here. This is another live stream. Dungeons and Dragons, Creature Codex, book review. Yes, it's a monster book. And yes, I have every intention of talk about pretty much as I can, as honest as I can. It's a huge book. There's a lot to cover. So I suggest grabbing some food, drink, and also probably settling down because it's going to take a little while to get through because there's a lot of material. I took a lot of notes. I'm hoping that you guys are going to enjoy this. Certainly, I have had mixed opinions about this particular book. But bear with me, there is always a reason why I have mixed feelings about anything. Hi, Fred Daniel, how's it going? Fender, hi, Fender. Fender is a patron for those of you who don't know. Kamikaze, hello, Kamikaze. Hi, Joe. Overboard DM's here. All right, so I am ready to go. You're ready to go, so let's get started. That's the thing we want. Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about monsters, the Alhoon. No, actually, no, that's not the topic for today. The topic for today is the Creature Codex is mistitled. Gosh, what am I getting at there? Is it actually mistitled? Well, I will explain myself because I spent significant amount of time going through the book. I've had the book for a long time. I've never done a review on it. This is the first time. One of the things I will say about a book like this, when you do a review on anything, is it's hard to review a monster book because I feel like any monster book you put out for Dungeons & Dragons 5e is probably going to be a really good book because, frankly, it's got more monsters in it. And as I've been told by many of my peers, more monsters is always good, and I don't disagree with that. So it's hard to review a book that's about monsters and primarily got monsters in it when you already really like monsters. So hard to really be unbiased. Anyway, that's not why you're here. You're here for one specific reason, and that is you want the lowdown. So we'll give you the lowdown. I have lots and lots of information for you. So this is a review of the Creature Codex for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. This is an enormous book, okay? An enormous book of Dungeons & Dragons 5e monsters, creatures, and beasts. There's a mixture there. We get lots of variety. Now, I believe there's so many monsters. I would say this is certainly on par with the Monster Manual. And even though the Monster Manual is a lot thinner, does that mean you're getting more from this book? Well, we'll get into that. So the Creature Codex is published by Kobold Press. They've put out quite a few monster books now. So Kobold Press has done 2 other monster books. The Tome of Beasts, the first one, which I have and I've reviewed, and the Tome of Beasts 2, which I don't actually have and I haven't reviewed, but yes, I probably will review in the future. There are like 420 pages in this book of monsters with about, I would say it's 410 new monsters or creatures for your Dungeons & Dragons 5e game. If you look at the book and you count the pages themselves, there's actually 429 pages. But if there's pages that aren't blank, we're talking about 420 pages. So does that really mean anything? Ultimately, page count doesn't mean anything. It's really the content that's important. This is a very heavy book, and as a result, they have stitched and glue binded this thing. So it should last a very long time. One of the things I was concerned as I was flipping through the book, because this is obviously a big problem with a big heavy book. If you don't bind it well, it just will not survive and it will come apart. And I've seen that happen with obviously Wizards of the Coast. A lot of their books come apart and they're not that heavy and they're not that big and they just seem to pick the cheap, easy way of dealing with everything, and therefore the book just falls apart. It's really, really frustrating and annoying. But then if you look at Paizo, a lot of their really big books, like the Pathfinder book itself, those books fall apart. They do. They get a lot of use, obviously, they get a lot of use, but they do fall apart. And it's because they really haven't selected a way of putting the book together in such a way that it will survive time and use. And because when you've got extra weight, you've got extra strain on everything. So I think this will last a long time. I think it will only be down to how much I use it and how much time passes, because I've only had the book for, is it a year? I think it's about a year now. The pages are a matte finish. It's a matte white finish. It's thick paper, but I did notice a few creases in there that seem to be occurring during manufacturing. That is not a good thing. But the pages are quite thick. I would have preferred a gloss finish to the pages myself. I personally prefer a glossy finish, but let's get real. The price would have been much higher for this book if they had a gloss finish. Gloss finish, extra cost, which is why they've gone with the matte finish on your pages. And a lot of older books, if you look at a lot of older books put out by Dungeons & Dragons before Wizards of the Coast, the pages are a matte finish. They're not usually a gloss finish. So I don't hold that against them in any way. That's fine. I understand. Price is important. And if the price was even more, I think that would probably make it difficult for me to consider purchasing a book as expensive as that would be, just because of the finish. Okay, the artwork. The cover artwork is perfect. Perfect for a monster manual. It features a special type of lich with friends, and they're not having a dinner party, and they're probably going to cause you a lot of trouble. And I think what I would say about this particular monster book is the picture itself, the front cover, actually tells you what the book is. It's very much indicative of what is in the book, okay? You've got that big mastermind villain, your lich, and his minions. And it's called the Creature Codex. I don't think that's quite right, but we'll get back to that. But anyway, I wasn't disappointed. Often you can pick up like a monster book and you will like, well, I don't understand it. I feel like the players are featuring more on here than the monster itself. But this is perfect. The interior artwork is bright with clean lines and extraordinary creatures. Extraordinary creatures, beasts and monsters. So one of the things when I was looking at the artwork that I really noticed is that this artwork style is certainly nothing like the watercolor finish that you get in the Monster Manual for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. The style, I have to say, is very much like the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition Monstrous Manual. And I've done a review on that one. I was looking at them and I was thinking, certainly it's been modernized and updated, okay? But I actually think the artwork in this book is better than the Tome of Beasts, because when I looked at the Tome of Beasts and how the artwork was constructed and printed, I felt like sometimes there was a bit of bleeding, and if there wasn't bleeding, that the contrast between colours and lines was lost. So I actually think the artwork in this book is significantly better than the Tome of Beasts. So if you like the Tome of Beasts, this is better again, in my opinion, in terms of how it presents everything. And yes, there is a picture for every single monster, as far as I can tell. Every single monster has a picture, and we should have one, absolutely. The contents table acts as an index, because almost every page has a different monster. Not always. There's some pages that have multiple monsters, or some monsters actually take up more than one page, which is usually the lords. There's a lot of lords in this thing. So you don't need to worry about having an index, because the contents page does that for you, which is great. I don't have to complain about that, which is awesome. I always like it when I don't have to complain about no index in a book, because the contents page is doing all of that work. A lot of the monster names are hard to pronounce. I was looking through them and trying to pronounce them, and I struggle with that sort of thing all the time, as many of you who have watched my channel know. But why is some of the naming a bit strange? Well, because a lot of the monsters have a cultural origin that doesn't have English as a first language. okay? Or it's just a silly name they've come up with. A lot of the names, though, are actually monsters that have been part of folklore or mythology and stuff like that, and as a result they've come in from a different culture. They might be from the Chinese culture, the Indian culture, South America, all over the place. And so when you take the way they pronounce a monster and you have to try and convert it into English letters and English pronunciation and follow those rules, it doesn't work. Okay, so that's why you'll find a lot of the monsters in there quite difficult to get your head around in terms of the name. And then again, as I said, some of the names are just bat crazy and silly. There's a large number of fantastic monsters in this book, great monsters in this book, silly monsters in this book, ridiculous monsters in this book, and modified real beasts. There were quite a few that I thought, well, okay, that's a modified beast. That's not really what I would consider a monster, but we still need those sorts of things. But I will say this, everything that they've done here is all in good fun. It's all in good fun, and that is the key to putting together a monster book. If it's fun, it's going to be working for somebody. What you will notice, as I've already said, is many of the creatures are from mythology or folklore from around the world, and there's some Lovecraftian monsters thrown in to shake things up. So if you wanted something that was more Lovecraft focused, yes, there is some stuff there, absolutely. Do you get things like different monsters from different cultures? Absolutely. The Wendigo is a good example of that. The Lovecraftian element, there's a monster that sticks out for me, which is basically just a floating or flying gibbering mouther. It's just made up of eyeballs and mouths and stuff. It's just, and flesh. So lots of really cool stuff in there. There's many variants or variations on the classic monsters from the Dungeons & Dragons 5e monster manual, or just classic monsters from Dungeons & Dragons, full stop, with a few that look like animals from real life. And you will notice some monsters look like they've taken a real creature or a number of different real creatures and mashed them together. This is very D&D. This is very much how Dungeons and Dragons used to make monsters. New monsters, like, well, what do? Well, we take a bit of an elephant and a bit of a cow and a bit of a lion and something, and you just jam it all together and you make a new monster. And certainly there are elements to that, like that in here. Okay. Almost every monster has a short descriptive text section in italic at the top. It doesn't follow this set format. It doesn't follow the same format. It's not a set format. It often details too much about the creature, making it useless as any kind of descriptive text for players, which I thought was what the intention was behind it. But it doesn't follow that format. And so because it doesn't follow that format, there's some problems. And because you're describing the monster itself and what it looks like, rather than, okay, you see there's a monster, just show them the picture, which would make far more sense. We've got a little bit of descriptive text. Usually it's only one line. Sometimes it can be 2 to 3 sentences though. So that takes up space, detracts from everything else. Now, Dungeons & Dragons 4e monster manuals made the mistake, certainly in the second one and the third one, of describing the monsters when they should have been sticking to and focusing on ecology, origins, and the lore of the monster. Those are the important things. We don't really need a whole lot of text describing monsters. So because it doesn't follow the set format, so that would make it useful to be used as descriptive text if you're not very good at describing a monster from a picture for a dungeon master, so you can't really use it like that all the time. Not every single monster has this italic section. Some of them don't. There's just a few, a handful that don't, but most of them do. It winds up being a mix of not quite lore or fluff and a mixture of description. So therefore it's sort of in that nebulous of filling space. I felt like they might have been trying to fill space with that section. Something they didn't need to do. I think if you're going to worry about how much space you have in the book, then seriously, let's go with a simply look, I need to create lore for the monster. Instead of putting the lore into the descriptive text, which is at the top that we've provided, let's just put it below that, so we're not including that. So it's really strange. I don't understand that decision myself, and you'll understand when you look at the book what I'm talking about. Okay. The monsters and creature lore is not always historically accurate. So because it's based on a lot of mythology and folklore, the history behind that mythology and those folklores that have developed over time, they have taken some artistic license and adjusted them or changed them a bit. They're not completely like that. You will find some monsters have not been fleshed out enough. But overall, I would say that the monster lore is pretty good. It doesn't take up the major aspect of any monster. Usually the biggest aspect of the monster is the artwork, and probably more likely in some cases the stat blocks. Stat blocks are quite large. So yes, I would say this is still better in terms of lore than the Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual for 5e. So if you're worrying, okay, is it as good as the Monster Manual for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, I would say it's better than that overall. Could it have been better? Yes, it could have been better, but then that's the case often with anything. So yes, if you are familiar with some of the creatures, beasts, and monsters in this book from your own culture, and you notice that there are some discrepancies in the lore and the description of how these monsters operate and work, that is because they have made adjustments. Maybe they just didn't do their homework very well. And also too, you've got to understand that a lot of these monsters, because they are based on folklore and mythology from a different culture, sometimes the folklore and mythology behind those creatures is not the same. Sometimes there can be variations on it. There's more than one sort of story, or there's more than one thing going on here. And also, some of the monsters will appear in different cultures, and different cultures have a slightly different spin on the same monster sometimes. And so I think they've tried to find a middle ground, possibly, in some cases, with a lot of this stuff. Okay, let me get to my water. Let's talk about the sidebars. The sidebars include variants on the creatures. That's often not just lore aspects, but there can be, but there might also be mechanical aspects to a stat block or a monster. So if you wanted to see some variations and variants, there are a few sprinkled throughout the book on the different creatures. And that can be specific creatures, or it can be just creatures in general. It just depends. Also, some of the sidebars include Midgard campaign setting monster details. So that means there's monsters in here that are specific to Midgard. They don't appear anywhere else. They are creations of Kobold Press. And Midgard is their world. Now that's fine as far as I'm concerned, because it's easy to remove campaign world information from a monster. Now, here's the thing I thought was entertaining. I did notice on the internet as I was doing my research that some people were commenting that there is monster lore that's specific to Midgard that's interwoven not just in the sidebars but into the lore sections. And there are some times when that happens. Is that a problem? I don't think it necessarily is. When you think about all the monsters you take and put into your own campaign, or you take from a different campaign world and transpose into whatever campaign world you're using, we do it all the time. Shifting monsters from one campaign world to another is a piece of cake. So when somebody says to me, oh, that's a problem because these monsters are specific to Midgard. What? What are you talking about? I don't understand. Don't explain it to me. I don't want to hear it. Okay? Monsters are easily transferable from one world to another. That's not a hard thing to do. Okay. The creature codex stat blocks tend to be tamer than the Tome of Beasts. The very first Tome of Beasts had some pretty deadly stat blocks in there. I really liked the Tome of Beasts because it does do that. Now, because even though it's tamer than the Tome of Beasts, I would still say that the creature codex is more deadly than the Dungeons & Dragons 5e monster manual. The standard monster manual that was put out, these monsters are still more badass than that monster manual. It kind of disappoints me a bit that the creature codex hasn't stayed with the same theme of the Tome of Beasts, but I can understand why they might have done something like that. Now, my understanding is that there was a bit of a hue and a cry on social media and from the public about how Kobold Press did not make the monsters in their Tome of Beasts in line with the monster manual, which for me is a nonsense, because that's exactly the thing I don't want them to do, okay? I don't want them to make pussy monsters that aren't really that scary. I don't want them to be things that people can just slice apart with no trouble. So I have no problem with the Tome of Beasts myself. Let's make that clear. So if you have a problem with the Tome of Beasts and the stat blocks and the challenge rating, we're going to be on a different page. For me, I would have been happy for them to stick with the Creature Codex, staying with that power level myself. So here's the other thing that I think cropped up, and that is that the challenge rating is not in line with the original monster manual for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. But frankly, it was never any good anyway. Challenge rating's never been any good anyway. The challenge rating for monsters in the original monster manual was never any good. There's huge variation within those monsters. Okay, they tried to make it as even as they possibly can, but you can't really do that when you try to create a monster. It doesn't really work. Maths and monsters and stat blocks, it's a nonsense. I've always felt it was a nonsense. I don't care whether it's Dungeons & Dragons 5e, 4e, 3.5, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Really, challenge rating and monster level and all, and that's all a creation of Wizards of the Coast. So for me, if people make a comment about the challenge rating for the Creature Codex being slightly out, whatever. It never worked that well anyway. Maybe from level 1 to 4, but even then there were variations that were quite dramatic. So who cares? I don't care about that. I don't actually look at the challenge rating of my monsters that much anymore anyway. I look at other things. A lot of the creature stat blocks have damage immunities. Yes, that's right. You're going to get a lot of monsters and creatures have damage immunities and resistances to damage that are not overridden by magic weapons, which I am really pleased to see. I am so pleased to see. I am so sick of seeing monsters where if you have a magic weapon or a silvered weapon, it goes straight through the monster's damage resistance, which means instead of doing half damage on the creature, you are now doing full damage, and of course their hit points are just not enough to be able to have them stick around long enough. You won't even have the chance to do anything. That used to annoy me quite immensely. I'm so pleased that they have decided to do this. Now that doesn't happen all the time. There are some monsters in there that have damage resistance where you can have a magic weapon and it will bypass that damage resistance. But there's a lot of monsters that have damage immunities. There's so many. And also, those damage resistances are actually really important. I think it's one thing that you want to do with your monsters is get rid of magic weapon is able to bypass damage resistance. Instead, magic weapon is good because, why is it good? Because you can deal with things like doing a little bit more damage, like 1 or 2 points, and it's a little bit easier to hit your target. And I think that's all right, that be the benefit of a magic weapon. That the benefit of having a magic weapon when you're facing a monster isn't that you suddenly can do twice as much damage, because that's essentially what happens when you have damage resistance and it's superseded or overridden by a magic weapon. You now do twice as much damage as you did before, which is far too much. Anyway, I've had my little rant about damage immunities and damage resistances. Well done, Kobold Press. Next, stat blocks again. A lot of the creature stat blocks have damage vulnerabilities. Whoa! Okay, I am shocked to see monsters with damage vulnerabilities in the creature codex, because it's like trying to find a four-leaf clover in the Dungeons and Dragons monster manual for 5e. If you look through the monster manual and you're looking for monsters and you think, okay, what should have vulnerability to a particular type of damage type? And in the past, say, skeletons used to be vulnerable to bludgeoning damage. You could smash them. It was easier to smash them up with a bludgeoning weapon than it was to try to cut through them with a slicing weapon or using a piercing weapon. In the monster manual, you don't have that sort of thing. It's very rare to see damage vulnerabilities. But you will see significantly more than the monster manual, you will see damage vulnerabilities in the creature codex. And I think that is a good thing, because there are things that creatures should be vulnerable to. And yes, they do make sense. Thank God for that. Yay. Okay. Appendix A. Let's talk about Appendix A. There's a lot of appendixes, by the way. Appendix A includes non-player characters that don't seem that useful with very specific or situational applications. And there are some that will be useful. There are some that will be useful and others that will I don't know what to do with this. Will I ever use it? How often will I use it? I probably won't ever use it. I mean, I find that most of the NPCs in the back of the monster manual, those particular stat blocks I've used multiple times because they're generic enough and they fill a particular niche quite well. The other thing I will say about the non-player characters in the appendix is a lot of those stat blocks are quite complicated. They're actually quite involved. They're not that simple. And I could say that that's the case with a lot of the monsters in this book. There are times when some of these stat blocks, and yes, there are stat blocks in the monster manual, the original one, that are quite large, but there are some very complicated monsters in here. So I don't feel like this is necessarily going to be the book you want to pick up as a beginner and just try to run with, because the monsters are far more complicated than they were before. And I mean, is that a bad thing or a good thing? It really depends on what the monster does. You know, if you have a monster that has a lot of traits, special features and so forth that operate all the time, that can be a lot easier to deal with than making a decision about what actions to take. But when you give a monster a lot of different actions and there's a lot of choice for a dungeon master, ultimately you're only ever going to get to use maybe 1, 2, or 3 of those abilities and you're done. And if there's a recharge feature, chances are you only get to use it once. So complexity in stat blocks. I like my monsters to do something interesting that sort of stands out. I don't like the monster stat blocks that I see in the Creature Codex and the Monster Manual, and there are some in the Creature Codex like this, where it's a bite, claw, or tail attack. You know, bite, claw, slam attack. Those sort of things are boring. Those are boring monsters. They're not the sort of thing that I really want in my game. You know, I want my monsters to sort of stand out. So you do have to have some complexity there. Is it too much? I'm still undecided about that. Okay, I can't give you a definitive answer about how I feel about that. There are some things I like about this book and some I don't. Appendix B has creatures listed by type with a page number, which is very useful to a dungeon master. So this is something that should always exist in monster books as far as I'm concerned. If you list the creatures or the monsters by type, and you can go through them very quickly, if you're running an undead campaign or you need an ooze, you can find it all really quickly. There's the page number, great, flick to it, and I'm done. That's a great way to structure a monster book. Appendix C has monsters listed by challenge rating with a page number, which is helpful if you use challenge rating. I'm not really a huge fan of using challenge rating to determine how I do things, but I can understand some people will want to sort of, okay, I want to make, really, it's a rough guess for me. I want a low-level monster, not a really high-level monster. which ones are the high-level monsters and which ones are the low-level monsters. Because, as I said, challenge rating, not hugely accurate. Okay, Appendix D has creatures listed by terrain type and by challenge rating, but with no page numbers. Now, I was thinking about this, and there are times when having it listed by terrain type and challenge rating, terrain type itself just alone is great. I think I would have preferred terrain type and page number for my monsters, rather than terrain type and then challenge rating. But we didn't get that. So let's just say it means there's a bit more flicking through the book to find stuff now, because you don't have a page number lined up with terrain type and the challenge rating. I think that's something they could have done. Okay, so we're coming into my final thoughts on this book. My instinct tells me that this book should have been called something else. It shouldn't have been called the Creature Codex. I feel like this book should have been called the Villain Codex or the Villain Volume. Okay? With all of the boss monsters in here, with all the different types of lords, there's animal lords, fey lords, demon lords, devil lords, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. There's lords up the kaboo. Okay? There are masterminds. I mean, you don't just get creatures and monsters, you get the mastermind behind the story. You get the main campaign villains in this book. Which is why I think this really should be called the Villain Codex. Because what you get in this book are your main big baddie, and then all of the supporting monsters, creatures, and beasts that would surround them, or they would utilize as minions, or that they have a relationship with. That's not always the case, but the vast majority of this book is very much structured like that. That's why when I say the cover is very indicative of what is actually in the book. In the center, you have the Lich. You get your big boss, and on the outside are the monsters that the Lich controls or are minions or has developed a relationship of mutual benefit. Or no mutual benefit. Maybe they're slaves. Who knows? This is what this book is. Now, when this book came out and I saw it, my first reaction to this book was I was really disappointed. Because my first reaction was, oh no, it's not a monster book. It's a villain book. It's a book full of villains. I didn't really want a book full of villains. I wanted a book that was more about just lots and lots of different monsters. I just wanted 400 plus completely new monsters. How unreasonable was that? Now that I think about it, I was thinking I'm pretty sure I was really, really unreasonable, expecting 400 plus completely new monsters. So actually, this makes a lot of sense. So when you're trying to construct your campaign, the Creature Codex is the book you want to find your main villain, if you ask me. Yes, you could use the monster manual. There are plenty of main villains in a monster manual. And yes, there probably could be also in the Tome of Beasts. But this book is very much that. Your main villain and the supporting monsters that surround them. And that's what I would say is the standout. And which is why I titled this video, The Creature Codex is Mistitled. Okay? Because it's a villain book. This monster book reminds me of some of the ridiculous aspects of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. The Monstrous Manual. The second version of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I've got that book, and when I was looking through that book, it bears so many similarities. The Creature Codex and the Monstrous Manual. There was so many things that lined up like that. That's not always the case, but I would also like to point out before people start freaking out and thinking, no. Really, ridiculous monsters is in the spirit of Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons has always had ridiculous monsters. Dragons aren't ridiculous. We know that, they've been around a long time. Part of mythology, legend, so forth. But the Beholder is a ridiculous monster. It's a cool monster, but it's still ridiculous. There's a lot of monsters like that. The Boulette, the land shark, it's a ridiculous monster, a land shark, a shark that swims under the ground and then pops up and then eats you and is covered in armor. It makes no sense. It's a ridiculous monster, but it's still cool. Even sand sharks, and for those of you who have played Dark Sun, you'll know what I'm talking about, sand sharks, or the roving mauler, which let's get real. The roving mauler is it's truly bizarre. Now, there are some things in here that stood out for me. The Fey Animal Lords are amazingly cute. I was looking through them and I thought, wow, they're really cute. They're kind of cool. They would fit into a young player's game very nicely. Now, would you use them in your own campaign? I don't know. It depends on what you're running. But I feel like if you're running for a younger audience, those little animal lords, those Fey animal lords, are going to work quite nicely. I think it's the sort of thing that younger audiences will really enjoy. Are there a lot? There's a few. I wouldn't say there's a lot. There's a few. There are lots of other types of lords, as I have mentioned, which I can't possibly cover all of them. The outstanding monsters for me, the things that stood out to me the most, that I gravitated towards. Now, why did I pick them? I think a lot of the reason why I picked these monsters was not so much because of the lore behind the monster or the stat block behind the monster, but that's not always the case. It was the visual. It's what I saw. The Crimson Mist, which is basically a red mist that has teeth and, tries to devour you like all monsters do, right? It's going to feed on you. The Bronze Golem. The Bronze Golem took me right back to Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. And then there is a bronze minotaur. And for some reason, that bronze golem popped out at me, and I really liked it. And it's not that extreme for some reason, but it just clicked with me. What made me really laugh, and I like this monster because it is so bizarre, and because it made me laugh, is the Keg Golem. There's a lot of really good golems in this book, but the Keg Golem really made me laugh, and I looked at that and I was thinking, wow, that's okay, all right, it can now pee on you with alcohol. That's pretty good. I thought that was pretty funny. By far, one of the most outrageous monsters. And actually, when I first saw this monster, I wasn't impressed. But the more I I looked at it, the more I thought about it. I think processing time takes some time to sort of adjust to what you see when it's completely new. The giant shark bowl ooze. This is basically a huge ooze that looks like a fish bowl. It's got a little treasure inside it, like a castle, like you would have in any kind of goldfish bowl, and swimming around is a shark, protecting it. It's ludicrous, but it's really funny, and it's really cool. It's a inspired idea. I don't know who came up with it, but they did a really good job with that one. Okay, the next one that stood out for me was the Ring Servant. Now, the Ring Servant just looks like an elemental covered in armor with magical blue energy. And it wasn't so much the visual for this that stood out for me, because I looked at it and I thought, okay, it's cool, but at this point I looked down at the stat block, and this is one time when I looked at a stat block and I thought, my gosh. And there's the stat block has a feature in there that affects everything in a 20-foot radius, and it does a lot of damage. That means that your party is probably going to wind up getting caught in this thing. So their attack is going to affect everybody. And I am always fond of monsters that can do that. That's always bad for a spellcaster. So my wizard's dead now. I don't know if this would kill the wizard, but it might, depending on what level you are. But I think that's what stood out for me, was the Ring Servant, is that particular ability and feature in there. And I like that sort of thing. I really do. I like the idea of monsters having an area effect that they can do, because players have characters that can do that sort of thing all the time, and huge areas. We're talking about anywhere from 10 foot to 20 foot radius or larger. Some of these spells just go forever, don't they? And the last one, and actually Logan from Dungeon Class sold me on this monster. The visuals, the abilities, and the mythology behind it. The Wendigo. The Wendigo, that stood out for me. I really thought that was a really good monster. Now, are there more monsters in here that are really good? Yes, there are. I could not possibly talk about all of them. There just isn't time. There's 410 monsters in here, okay? So there's a lot of stuff here. So it's hard to sort of cover everything. Okay. I would say to you, if you are thinking of buying this particular book, if you're looking for a book that is going to give you your main overarching villain or your mid-level villain, and you want some accompanying creatures, beasts, and monsters to act as minions or servants or something like that, this book is pretty good at doing that. I really think this is the right book. If you're looking for a book that's just full of monsters that aren't really masterminds or the main villain or anything like that, if you're looking for something that's more like the monster manual, which would be hard to do, I don't know that this is necessarily the book that will satisfy you. You may have the same reaction I initially had, which is, oh, I've picked up a master villain book rather than a monster manual. But in any case, it is an interesting book, and I can't say that there is anything that is going to change my decision about buying it. I think buying it was the right decision for me. It wasn't when I first purchased it. Now that I see what it is, I understand what they were trying to go for, and that's good news. Now, if you found this video useful, great. I have many reviews on monster manuals and different books if you're interested. I have a bunch of videos for players and dungeon masters covering every aspect of Dungeons & Dragons and Dungeons & Dragons 5e. If you want to support the channel so I keep doing video content like this, you can through Patreon, the Amazon affiliate links down in the description, the merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or just watch my videos, that's fine too. Make sure to do the usual YouTube things like share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. And we're back, which means I've got to put my eyes on. And hopefully I don't get too nasally today. Is my eyes? No, I'm going to need the glasses. All right. So if you have questions, this is the time to do it. Where is this? Can I see? No, I can't see with that. But I have to see it for the other thing. Okay, question. Just in case I miss you. You can ask me a question about anything. I do not mind. Question, please. That's there. Pin that comment. All right. Okay. It's there. Let's go back to the top and see what we've got. Okay. I've already said hi to Fred Daniel. Fendar's here. Patron. Thank you for coming, mate. Kamikaze's here. Overboard DM Joe. Go check out his channel. Overboard DM does miniatures, terrain, reviews. It's a good channel. XY Tech. Hello from Wisconsin. Jasper's here. Hello, Jasper. Steve Likens here. Clickbait. Probably not. No, it's definitely clickbait. It's definitely clickbait. But it's legitimate. I do think this book is definitely a villain codex rather than just a creature codex. I think it should have been called the villain codex in my book. In my mind, the book is that. Does that make sense? Hello, Pat Sherwood. Pat Sherwood is a patron also. How's it going? The cover to me basically shows an entire encounter. Beautifully done. Yes, exactly. Right down to the master villain. Did you see what I did with that? Master villain. I'm supporting myself. I'm supporting my argument. Do you believe my argument? It's up to you. What do you got here, Fendar? Who would merge an owl bear and a bear? Oh, an owl and a bear. That would be ridiculous. Well, you're right. Absolutely. Couldn't. Sight rot. Yes. Sight rot. Anybody can contract sight rot. I think everybody does. I know I do. That's why I'm wearing the glasses. What do you got here? One of the things that I was told about the monsters in this book are quite large, so you can just show the picture to your players. You might have to put your hand over the important stuff so they can't see the stat block and so forth, but you can like pick up the book and turn it around and show them the monster, because the monsters aren't tiny little things. A list of fluffy bunnies. Vetrovid. Okay, Vetro. Okay, yeah, maybe. Fluffy bunnies. There are some fluffy bunnies in there, kind of. There are some fluffy creatures. Immune to cold and negative energy. Remember? I remember undead being immune to a lot of different things. Sometimes now it doesn't seem to be the case. It's like there's a lot of monsters that you can hurt them no matter what. I don't like that. Negative energy. Well, look. So negative energy is now classified as necrotic. So if you see necrotic as a tag in terms of a damage type, we're talking about negative energy. Does that make sense? Okay. What do you got here? Vitro. Something that used to be in 3.5 Pathfinder. Good clerics were channeling positive energy to heal, and bad ones negative to harm. That's right, yes, absolutely. I mean, we don't have that now, but it used to be there. What's that, Steve? Negative energy is entropy, the fuel of the undead, and positive energy. Okay, all right. So, we've covered a lot. The Fiend Folio. No, I don't think you could say that this book is in the same vein as the Fiend Folio. No. Volume of villains. Steve. Yep. Okay. So yours rolls off the mouth better than mine. The villain volume or volume of villains probably slightly better. Yeah. Okay. Right. You get the star. I'll come second place in terms of my name. Hello, Rivers. How's it going? And I don't know if Cujo is still there. He's probably busy, mate. He's probably working. He's probably doing stuff he's supposed to be doing and trying to keep a track of this live stream at the same time. Not that easy to do. Okay, what else have we got here? 10d8 force. What's the average? Really cool. Yeah, the ring servant. I know what you're thinking, people. I know what you're thinking. Hang on. Did he say 10 8-sided dice worth of damage? On average, it's going to be 45. That's right. That's right. It's a really good monster feature. It is almost able to stand up and be a solo monster, although I would imagine it would still get pummeled very quickly because it doesn't have that many hit points for the level that it is. You're too late. It doesn't matter, Vitro, whether you bought it now or you bought it, before I did this video. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I won't mind. I won't care. It's all cool. If you've got the book, you know what I'm talking about. That's all I have to say. There's always going to be somebody who wants to see these sorts of things, and I have tried. I've avoided doing book reviews for so long. I'm trying to do them now. Now, what would happen if I were to flick through 428 pages of this book and then put down my video notes over the top of that. Would that happen? Maybe that'll happen in the future. Maybe that'll happen in the far future. It's probably going to happen eventually. I'm trying really hard to do the reviews. I really am. Ramiro, I don't know if I got your name correct or I botched it up. I'm glad you liked the video. You're from California? I bet you the weather's warm there. It's a fine day here, but it's still cold. Pardon me. I suppose I should tell you before I start answering questions, because Fendar's got a question, so do a few other people. What's next week? So last week was the Dragon of Ice by Peak, and we covered the Circle of Thunder. This week, the Creature Codex, a book review. Next week would be the Curse of Strahd. And it kind of would be a Curse of Strahd live stream. But I'm going to talk about trinkets in a very general sense. But there is a possibility, if anybody remembers when I did a whole bunch of videos on clever uses of mundane adventuring gear, like how to use a rope in your Dungeons and Dragons game, or how to use flour, or how to use a candle, or all that sort of stuff. Like the 10-foot pole, how to use a 10-foot pole in your Dungeons and Dragons game. I am toying with the possibility of going through all of the trinkets and trying to come up with different ways you could use them in your game. I don't know how successful that would be. I feel like it would be extremely difficult, and I would probably wind up coming up with some ideas that are just like nutty. But there's a good chance I might wind up doing a video on every single trinket in the player's handbook, or every single trinket that is part of the Gothic horror or the Gothic trinkets list in the Curse of Strahd. There's a trinkets table for the Curse of Strahd. There's also a horror trinket table in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. I'm very tempted to do something like that. I don't know if people will like it. It might be too specific, but I feel like it would be fun. And I can't imagine anybody will ever try to make videos like that. Maybe I'm going to sink myself doing it, but there's a chance that it might happen. We'll see. But next week, I'm talking about trinkets in general. Fendar, you got a question here. Okay. I was wondering if Fred wanted a book like The Fiend Folio. Oh, okay, so Rivers RPG, yes, I would absolutely be interested in The Fiend Folio. Now, I'm hanging out with AJ Pickett today in about an hour, and with Josiah from HowtoDandD and with Wally DM. And I think what will tend to happen is we'll wind up talking about monsters more often than not. So the more monster books I have, the easier it will be to be able to keep up with Josiah from HowtoDandD and with AJ Pickett, which I don't expect I could possibly hope to do, because those two know their stuff. But as they have pointed out to me many times before, they have to do research. So, but I don't have the Fiend Folio. So absolutely, the Fiend Folio would be something I would be interested in. I just don't know that it's something that I could buy nowadays because it's so expensive. And yeah. But yes, I like the idea of the Fiend Folio, because the Fiend Folio I would consider the R18 monsters. And I really want to talk about monsters that Wizards of the Coast will never put out for 5e because they're just too nasty. And I want to do nasty. I want to do nasty monsters. Nasty monsters. Okay, Fender, your question. Sorry, I almost got there. Question: what's your opinion on the Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes Bestiary? Does it hold up? There's a couple of monsters in there that I thought were all right. Do they hold up in terms of a gameplay? I have used one or two. No, they don't. No, not against experienced players. They don't have a hope. That's one of the issues with Wizards of the Coast. The monsters they're putting out from the Monster Manual, now that they've done the Monster Manual, monsters coming out from Wizards of the Coast are still more powerful than the Monster Manual, but they're still not enough. They've given the players so many tools and so many toys. Dungeon Masters monsters have to be completely modified. Now, to give you an example of what happened just recently, I ran from Mythic Odyssey, Theros Mythic Odysseys, or the Mythic Odysseys of Theros, that book. It's very Greek themed, and in the back of there is a monster, and it's called the 100-handed one. It gets 4 attacks, okay, with its multi-attack with its swords, or it can throw 2 rocks, okay? That's on its turn. It's not a legendary creature, so my group faced this off. This is a challenge rating 16. My group are 13, level 13. There are 5 of them. Well, there was actually 4 that day, 4. And I gave this thing legendary actions at the end of every player's turn. Every player's turn. That's the adjustment I made. I gave it maximum hit points. Maximum. Okay, not the average that's listed on the stat block, but I maxed it out. And every time it took a legendary action, not its turn, but a legendary action, and it could do it at the end of every player's turn, I let it have its multi-attack all over again. That means it could make up to 4 longsword attacks, or it could throw 2 more rocks. That monster lasted 2.5 rounds. 2.5 rounds against my players. Okay? 1 player went down. That's the paladin, because he tried to engage it in melee. Everybody else stood behind a building, popped the head out, did something, either shot it, Gloomstalker just pummeled it with its arrows, or shot magic at it, and then hid behind a big building again. That is the kind of thing you have to do with monsters nowadays, because Wizards of the Coast don't make monsters that scary. Their monsters they're like little kittens. Hello, little kitten. Hello. Ah, it's a nice little kitten. But, you know, they're not that great. They really aren't. Okay. Next, I need to get through the questions faster, otherwise I'm going to run out of voice power. Vitro, I'm sorry I'm not using your whole name, Windmaster. Question, in your games, have you ever adjusted stats during combat? Yes, I have. I don't do that a lot nowadays. I try to make my adjustments beforehand, or come up with what I plan to do beforehand. I don't necessarily write it all down. Sometimes I just have it in my head. But yes, I have adjusted stats on the fly. I try not to do that too much if I can help it nowadays, because it's tempting to keep ramping up the difficulty until I find the sweet spot. And sometimes when you're trying to find the sweet spot, you can go way too far. So instead, I just slowly but surely, every time my players face monsters, I make them a bit more tougher and a bit more tougher, and I usually pre-plan it a little bit. Okay? Jasper, question. What are your opinions on roll tables? I think roll tables are fine if you want to do that randomly. I think roll tables need to be, a lot of roll tables need to be from 1 to 100 rather than 1 to 10 or 1 to 6 or 1 to 20. It is not long enough. And roll tables, I think, are actually just lists of ideas. I think rolling randomly on a table sometimes doesn't serve you. It is sometimes better for a roll table to be used like a list. You go through the list, what works for you, and that's the thing you pick. Okay, next question. Rivers RPG also has a channel, by the way, a YouTube channel. Question, do you feel the game is more player friendly? In other words, players live longer? Yes, I do. And it makes a lot of sense. I think ultimately Dungeons and Dragons 5e was trying to make it clear, and look, Dungeons and Dragons 4e did the same thing. You know, there are lots of ways to keep your character alive. It's trying to make it player friendly so that more people will come on board, because one of the things that drives players away, not all players, but can drive players away, is their character dies. And they don't like that. So if you make it harder and harder for the character to die, then, you know, you don't have to worry about them freaking out. The problem is you don't have to worry about character death. If you have implemented plenty of different ways of dealing with character death other than you have to make a new character, then players don't really care. I can assure you, I have a lot of character death in my games if it happens. Right now, it's hard because they're level 13. But I've had a lot of character death in my games. I'm playing with friends, so they kind of understand that. They've played for a long time, they get that too. But I don't make the decision about what happens to their character if their character dies. So it's not this overwhelming, oh, I've lost my character that I love. Now it's more about, well, the arc of the character that my player's running is very different now. You know, now we're looking at your traditional hero. Your traditional hero was like this. They faced something outside of their realm, beyond their capacity, but they still stuck at it. And they usually die trying. And then they raise from the grave, or they raise from the ashes stronger than before. Or they're not killed, but they are significantly badly injured. And it takes them some time to recover. And the story of the traditional hero, okay, is lost now. And so I do feel like the game is steering towards keeping players alive. Yeah, that's just me. Yeah, that's where it is. Vitro, what do you got here? What is the Fiend Folio? Is it any good? The Fiend Folio is a collection of very, very nasty monsters, demons and devils. Quite horrific artwork. It got a lot of flack. It is certainly what helped drive the satanic panic for Dungeons and Dragons. So yes, it's a very famous book. Steve, okay, but the Ring Servant does have a fly speed, stay up and out of the way. Yes. Yeah, I know. I noticed that too. I did notice. Yeah. Okay, Steve, what do you got here? Question. Why'd you use... why'd you use to avoid book reviews? Okay, so the reason I avoid book reviews is because I am not completely convinced that they are the best use of my time. So the best use of my time in the past, in terms of how I think about it, is making stuff that will get more people playing the game. Now, whether that's being a player in the game and explaining game rules, which I don't really find that much fun nowadays, but I do it. I do leave a lot of comments in some of my older videos on that sort of stuff, because that'll get people past the barrier of I don't understand how this game works. By explaining and demonstrating. Demonstration is important. So that's one of the things I really focused on. But also too, trying to get people past their character sheet. So I really wanted to make more videos related around that. And then helping Dungeon Masters get into the game. I find that experienced Dungeon Masters couldn't care two hoots about anything that is on YouTube about Dungeons and Dragons. Most of my friends who are experienced don't watch my videos or anybody else's. They couldn't care less. I find that to be the case with most of my friends who play Dungeons & Dragons in New Zealand. They don't watch videos on Dungeons & Dragons. None of it. They don't watch WebDM, they don't watch Dungeon Dudes, they don't watch me, they don't watch nobody. So I tend to make my stuff tailored towards the beginner Dungeon Master who's desperately looking for something. So I want to make videos that help them get past all of the barriers that I put up and the problems that they encounter that they don't know how to solve. So that's why book reviews sort of pull me away from that, which is why I wanted to avoid doing them, Steve. That doesn't mean that I will stop doing them. I will slow down that process. That process will slow down a little bit. But I will make sure that I try not to let things go too far. Since it's quite clear to me that I can do a live stream on a book review and not show you the book, and you guys are quite happy to listen to me talk about it, then I know that's got an audience. I'll keep doing that when I need to. So that means the new books coming out, I will talk to them when I have them. Yes, I will get the Tome of Beasts too, and I'll talk about that book. There are a couple of other books I would like to talk about, but we'll get to them some other time. But I do want to sort of focus on keeping the flow for players and dungeon masters going. Okay, I'm an eclectic YouTube channel rather than focused on one point, and I have been focusing very much on the dungeon master over the past few months. Okay, Ramiro, I think I got your name right. You nailed it. Most people get it wrong, and the weather is perfect. Oh, good. Now, I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to struggle saying anything. I'm going to have to be careful. I'm supposed to be talking very shortly. Love the idea, but maybe break it down by common trinkets to make it easy on yourself. It would be very interesting. Yeah, so the first video I do on trinkets is I'm probably going to cover the general concept of how you could use trinkets in your game, because I think there's a lot that people don't consider with those particular items. So that's what is going to be next week. And then after that, depending on how well that does, I may, as I said, I may do videos on just a specific trinket, like clever uses for a mummified goblin hand. I get to see the title now. It's like somebody's going to scroll through their feed and like, what? Clever uses for a mummified goblin hand? Who makes a video like that? So it is quite likely that I will do that. But I don't know. I will probably give it a shot at least once or twice and see how it works out. Jacobo 5. Calling Wizards of the Coast monsters like kittens. Hey, I like kittens. But I don't want to go around, putting the kittens to the sword. I want something really, really. I want my monsters. Put my monsters to the sword, not my kittens. Okay, Overboard DM. What do you got here, Joe? Just want to say I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they make a 5.5 ed edition, not a 6th ed edition. 5 ed edition has its issues, but it's not bad. So I don't think that anything that's coming in the future, and I think there is something coming in the future. I've said it before. I said, look, I reckon by 2022 we'll start to see the next ed edition popping out, or a revision of version 5. I've said it, and it would be lined up with the movie. I think it's coming, but I don't think that the game system will change so dramatically that you will despise it. I think it's quite possible that you might wind up getting the Dungeons & Dragons 5e that you were promised that you never got. I think you might actually wind up getting, the next time round, a game that has 3 modes of play. Super simple, with very few mechanics. Your standard, which is probably what everybody else is going to usually play, okay? If you are like 12 years or older, you'll probably be playing that game. And then, or actually probably 9 and up, because 9-year-olds are pretty smart. And then you'll have the next game, which is advanced, which won't look like anybody else's table because it will just be a collection of variant rules you can tack on to the motor or the engine or the core rule system. So, just saying it, I don't think it's going to be that much different to what you've already got. I think the only difference is they might decouple things like bonus actions and other things like that and make them disappear into the ether. Vendor question. Is it even possible to challenge a level 17 party nowadays? Okay, so Fender, since you've asked me that question, I have almost TPK'd a level 20 group. And that group faced a monster of my own creation. They got away because they had things like Dimension Door and Teleport. What happened is there were 4 of them. They were facing up against this Titan, and the goal, if they had figured it out, was to destroy the heart. They destroy the heart, and then they've succeeded. That was their goal. It wasn't to fight the monsters. And that's one of the things at high level play you've got to realise is don't give them stuff where they just have to defeat it. Destroying the heart was the only thing that was important. That was it. They got into a bad situation. One of the characters went down in 2 hits. Another character went down in about 3 hits. He had 256 hit points. But my monster that I built had legendary actions. The combat lasted 1 and a bit rounds, maybe almost 2 rounds, and essentially it was pumping out about 100 points of damage with its ray attack, and if you got up close to it, it was doing about the same again. And it could use a melee or a ray attack as a legendary action. That's what I had to do to deal with level 20 characters to make them feel like they were level 1 again. And they still didn't die. Still didn't die. So you can challenge them, but you've got to break all the rules. There is no advice in the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Monster Manual or on the internet that will help you to make that work. Which is why high-level play should not be combat focused, frankly. And I know your character's built around combat, but seriously, don't make high-level play combat focused. It's not a good idea. Okay, Steve Fender, I easily did so for about 3 months or so. It's much easier than you think. Can help you if desired. Yeah. So one of the things that you want to do is you definitely want to check out the there's a chart, quick build monsters, and it shows you how much damage the monster should do per round. And that is the thing you want to focus on. The monster needs to do that much damage at that level per round. And in some cases, per turn. When you get past a certain point, I think it's about level 10, 11, 12, 13, you actually need to, instead of that column saying damage per round by the monster put out on average, it needs to be per turn. Okay? And if it's a solo monster, you need to make sure that they are taking a turn at the end of every player character's turn. Otherwise, things like Gloomstalkers and Paladins and Wizards, Divination Wizards in particular, they will just crush it all. Well, like a bug. Okay. Jane. Hello, Jane. Sins of the 4th Ed Edition. I'm asking about what killed the Ed Edition. My friends want to try it even after 5th Ed Edition played, and I've heard bad opinions. Okay, so I've run and played Dungeons and Dragons 4e. So very quickly, I'll explain to you what happened with Dungeons and Dragons 4e. Dungeons and Dragons 4e was designed to be extremely balanced. So they tried to design it so it would function like a computer game, and they built computer games around the mechanics for that. Okay, so that's one of the things they did with 4e. The other thing is monsters were created in such a way as they would be simple to integrate into an encounter. The game was very much built around building encounters for dungeon masters. And it's actually very easy from about level 1 to 5 to do that. Once you get past level 5 and you start going to sort of level 8 and onward, it becomes more difficult. You just can't follow any of the guides that you are provided with. It doesn't work. Again, it breaks down. All of that stuff, monster level doesn't mean anything. Encounter level means nothing, okay? But it meant that you got encounter powers that you could use every encounter. You got at-will powers that you could use all the time, and you got a daily encounter, okay? So you had to have a rest. 24 hours had to pass before you could get your daily power back. And so you only had you could switch things out and so forth. Now, what I find with Dungeons and Dragons 4e is some people saw that game, it was too different to what they were used to, and they hated it. And they stayed with 3.5, or they go and play Pathfinder, because that was 3.75. It was basically 3.5 open game license, slightly adjusted. Okay? And then there were some people who loved it. And I frankly found that a lot of kids loved playing Dungeons and Dragons 4E. But they didn't like playing it at high level. It's got a lot more complicated. My group got to about level 13, and they were like, oh, I'm having so much fun. And I was miserable. I was miserable. As the Dungeon Master, I just could not cope with it anymore. And so you will find what happens with Dungeons and Dragons 4E is the number of people who wanted to play the game actually expanded. I know people think that's strange, but I assure you, I ran games in stores, and the audience who wanted to play it was much younger. It was kids. They loved it. The older generation despised it, but not everybody. But most of the time it was the kids who loved it. What was really the big problem is that people did not want to Dungeon Master 4E. The reality was that the game was built focusing on the players so much that the Dungeon Master was given the kinds of tools they needed initially, and then after that it just became too much to deal with. And so people didn't want to keep going with it. You'd get to a level 5 or 6 and you're like, I've had enough. That happened to me. I had a Dungeon Master who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons 4E, and they got to level 6 and they said, I've had enough. I'm sick of this. I want to go and play something else. Let's go play Star Wars instead. So that's what we did. And I wound up running Dungeons and Dragons 4E. Would you believe it? So, yeah. The problem is that if you give too many things to the players and you try to satisfy the biggest part of the market, suddenly there are no Dungeon Masters to run the game. And that's what happened to Dungeons and Dragons 4E. Ultimately, is that there just wasn't enough people willing to run the game. End of story. Okay. I'm gonna answer these questions really quickly, and then I do have to go because I am supposed to be in a meeting very shortly with some people. Steve, only about 40% of the game was actually even created. It was supposed to be 100% online and used terms like squares, which felt very gamey, I think, ironically. Yeah, there were aspects to the game that never got completed. You're right, Steve, absolutely. Possibly. I think they're trying to steer a lot of the mechanics for 5e towards 4e, and I think that's a mistake. I think they will burn their bridges. I don't think that will work. They will find the same problem that they had with 4e, which is they'll have a whole lot more people who want to play the game and like, oh, that's easy to run, that's easy to play, should I say. I don't have to figure out too much stuff. I just have to select a few options and we're ready to go. And then the Dungeon Masters will disappear and they'll go and do something else because they can. So yeah, you've got to actually build the tools for everybody so that there is some sort of stability within the community. Otherwise, you give too much to one side of the equation and the game and it all falls apart. If you give too many tools to the Dungeon Masters and not enough to the players, then there's no players and you've got Dungeon Masters and nobody to play with them. So yeah. Okay, so I think we've covered everything. Creature Codex is down. That's another thing off my list to consider covering, which is good news. So thank you to my patrons for showing up. Thank you to everybody who sat through my very long live stream, and hopefully you found this useful in some way. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, or the early wee morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.